Hi guys, I will explain now why criminalizing capitalism is the only way to survive on this planet, and why capitalism as a system is programmed for ecosystem destruction, especially in these days when we have fossil fuels making planetary destruction so very much a possibility. You know, as a species, humanity has lived for many ten thousands of years, more than 95% of our existence, in small hunter-gatherer communities or small settlements. There was no organized violence or war, and people lived in pretty much egalitarian societies. That doesn't make it perfect, and life was probably harsh, but there was no such thing as war and organized violence, right? This is an amazing finding of anthropology, and we must really think about that the situation we are in right now is not normal for human beings. So indigenous societies all around the world, they have this kind of spiritual wisdom of non-violence and of egalitarian coexistence within ecosystems. They know this, they have this knowledge, they have this inner wisdom. They are still connected with nature. But everywhere capitalism arises, everywhere people are pushed out of their subsistence lifestyles. And then, while they had no money, they were not poor because they had food, they lived together, they had meaningful lives. But it is capitalism that pushes them out of their subsistence lifestyles, destroys their ecosystems, right? And now they are poor. And then organizations like the World Bank have the audacity to say that when these people are now above $1.25 or something, oh no, they are above the poverty line. But meanwhile, farmers who had meaningful lives in India or China, right, and who are pushed out of their lifestyles because of capitalism and closing the commons, right, they are committing suicide. And so you can clearly see that capitalism is this atrocious and violent, expansive, predatory system. Because indeed, what on earth happened to us? Well, the same that I explained you, right? Capitalism. In ancient wisdom, and especially in Christianity, but also in other spiritual traditions, money is recognized as the root of all evil. But why? And is it money as such that is recognized as evil? Because these ancient civilizations, from observation of empires rising and collapsing, societies getting completely polarized between very wealthy people and very poor people, they had observed this, and they knew that perpetual exponential growth is impossible in any biophysical system. What did they discover? That it's the interest, stupid, why we are heading for collapse. And so now you see why there were these jubilees, these debt cancellations in antiquity, because people knew this, that compound interest sets your society up for collapse, right? But now capitalism has been able with fossil fuels to push this system on a completely global level and to keep growing exponentially. But as we are breaking down our ecosystem, we are heading for disaster, right? And it's absolutely crucial that people start to understand this. What is at the core of this is a misrepresentation of money that has been pointed out only lately by Mark Ovin and Sergio Dominguez. that if you misrepresent money, right, make it a commodity and a measure of value at the same time, you set yourself up for failure. And this is money's core misrepresentation. If we do not understand that you need to have a passive system that has bounded input and bounded output, right, that can return to zero. So if you have a debt of 1 and a credit of 1, they cancel each other out. Once you destroy this connection, the monetary system becomes detached from reality, right? And it starts driving economy and society into exponential growth and exponential misdistribution of wealth. And eventual, this is the point, this may lead to destruction this time. So we have clearly defined capitalism's main weapon in the monetary system. By compound interest, by misrepresenting money and credit, money becomes a weapon for mass exploitation based on fraud. And this is where we still are. We are still struggling with the same things that people in the late Bronze Age were struggling with, the misrepresentation of money, resulting in the charging of compound interest, which is an utterly destructive weapon. And of course, when plunder becomes a way of life for men in a society, they will over time invent a legal code that authorizes it and a moral code that glorifies it, right? So you always have the psychopath making legal what is absolutely destructive just because it concentrates an enormous amount of wealth and power, right? So this system is institutionalized psychopathy. The devil indeed is in the system, in the algorithm of the system of perpetual wealth accumulation by a small minority, perpetual inequality and exponentially growing inequality, and exponential destruction and burdening of the ecosystem by exploitation. Capitalism must therefore be recognized as institutionalized crime, and this is very, very important. It is the systematic weaponization of ownership for the extraction and perpetual exponential accumulation of unearned income. And this is a crucial definition, right? So the problem is not in the free market. The problem is in capitalism. Capitalism is a system that has captured the free market in a web of organized crime by the misrepresentation of money and credit. Now, the systemic dynamics, the algorithm, what the system is programmed to do by lawmaking and institutionalization are basically two main things, and we cannot emphasize it enough, right? Capitalism, the dynamics of compound interest, they create a Ponzi scheme. They cause exponential growth and they force the economy to grow exponentially, which is impossible on a finite planet. And they concentrate wealth and power exponentially, which is antisocial, anti-democratic, and in fact, as Professor Thomas Puckett says, poverty is preventable genocide. And so capitalism is in fact a preventable genocide because we can know and understand its structural dynamics and we could solve this. So it is politically organized crime. It is the institutionalization of exploitation, and it is financial power abuse for the organization of exploitation and the elite accumulation of wealth and power. Capitalism is systemic criminality, right? And we have been struggling against systemic criminality ever since the late Bronze Age, when things went devastatingly wrong for humanity, right? We should understand this, learn from this, and correct it. So, as I mentioned already, the enormous amount of energy that is available in fossil fuels made capitalism an organized crime system on steroids, and it is absolutely programmed for the extinction of the human species, right? If we do not develop socio-ecological intelligence and eliminate this destructive algorithm of capitalism, we are done. So here is biophysical reality. Here is also ethical reality, right? The system violates ecological boundaries already. We are destroying the planet, breaking down the ecosystem. This is a disaster. But also, billions of people fall short of the most elementary necessities in life because they lost their subsistence lifestyles and they are driven off their land and they are pushed into the boundaries of capitalism where people are violently exploited for very low wages, right? And so also poor people, of course, they cannot take care of their environment, right? They don't have the means, they don't have the time, they are so oppressed that they are just struggling to get by. So if we want a future for humanity on this earth, we must set people free from capitalism to take care of each other and to take care of the earth. Now, the main failure of human beings to understand the impossibility of infinite exponential growth in any biophysical system, in this case the biosphere, makes that we are systemically programming ourselves for disaster. Capitalism is ecocidal by design. And I should put genocidal also, and in this case, by the enormous destructive power of fossil fuels, we may even have complete genocide of the human species. We are already in a mass extinction of biodiversity, right? And every ecologist will understand how devastating this is. So, the other thing is, what is happening with this enormous amount of time, energy, and resources that are being used in a capitalist system? Well, they are accumulated primarily by the top 1% of Earth's population. And that is how the system, the structures are designed to work, right? So you cannot lift all boats, right? You cannot lift people out of poverty when 95% of the wealth that you produces is concentrated by the top 1%, right? This system is anti-economical by design, as it makes the most insane abuse of scarce resources, time, and energy. It is utterly well-being energy inefficient. So, what can we say as a system? And this is very important, that capitalism, its structural dynamics, they are antisocial, anti-economical, genocidal, and ecocidal by design. So neoclassical economics is pseudoscience, as it has no basis in biophysical reality. They only see the business model, and this is this abstract entity that can grow exponentially, and there's no problem there. But economists, neoclassical economists, they do not see the ecological boundaries, nor do they see the ethical boundaries, right? They are really the blind leading the blind, now driving everybody to fall into a pit that may be final extinction of humanity. But of course, in this glorious system of institutionalized corporate state capitalism, there are a lot of incentives to be happy, and greenwash the damn thing, right? So lies and propaganda by the elites who are concentrating wealth and power so very efficiently, right? They want to believe their own lies. That is exactly the problem. They wish they could believe their own lies, and they do not want to see how they are putting everybody at risk for complete extinction, right? And these mentalities need to change. Now, in hindsight, this very systemic problem of compound interest, of exponential growth, and of wealth concentration by a small elite, an institutionalized elite, has been with us from the Sumerian palace economy, which was a totalitarian system, right? So law, the army, the military, and economics, they all came together. You always had this trinity of political power, economic power, and military power that was built around this systemic concentration and accumulation of wealth. So that is the origin of the capitalist system. Until now, the corporate state, which is also a kind of palace economy of our modern times, doing exactly the same. And as then these kingdoms and empires, they went to war with each other. Right now we have the Chinese corporate military complex, and we have the American corporate military complex, right? Who are competing for scarce resources and markets. It is the system that puts everybody against each other. And so what we need is at the United Nations level, ethically mature politicians who understand this system, who understand its destructiveness, and who are willing to change it radically. Some people will say, oh, but then it's communism. No, communism was just state capitalism, right? It had the same monetary flaw, it had the same kind of banking system, and it was the same kind of complete concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a minority. In that case, it was the single corporation that was the state. But the monetary flaw and compound interest were still practiced in this totalitarian system of political, military, and economic power. It is no solution. The solution is a kind of anarchy, free market, social democratic system that we need to build together. But then we have to eliminate this power and wealth concentrating dynamics. And it is always the same, as C. Wright Mills had very well observed. It is the collusion of political, military, and economic power that builds this elite-driven system that are time and again collapsing, that are time and again going to war with each other, that are time and again causing ecological destruction, and that are time and again causing enormous social inequalities and suffering. So the system from the very palace economy in ancient Sumer, it has been this organized anti-social system with a small amount of very wealthy people and a large amount of people in misery, right? And we need to understand this, especially in the West, where the academics are tending to be close to this happy space, right? Blind to what the system is doing. So, always the same structure, time and again. This is what Peter Turchin has called cliodynamics, right? And they made a large study of this. It's how these elites organize a perverse wealth pump, right? how time and again they are able to concentrate wealth and power with a small minority. And of course, we have to understand the dynamics of this perverse wealth pump. We have to understand it and correct it. So, is this all a conspiracy theory then, that we are dominated by a small amount of elites under the Bank and with corporate power trying to regulate our lives? Look, man, this is just reality. This is how the system works, and it creates systemic corruption, right? Because as you concentrate power and wealth with a small system, this system will always become corrupted. We know this from history. We shouldn't allow this to happen. But, of course, mainstream media, they are largely owned by capitalist organizations. So you get organized denial, right? And it is organized denial of the criminality of the system, of its ecocidal programming, and of its genocidal dynamics. And I have to say, you have to understand, and we all have to understand, that academia, mainstream academia, is an enormous part of the global propaganda machine. Mainstream academia is fully part of the problem. But of course, its success is also in the entertainment for the masses. In Roman times, you had these games. Nowadays, you have these games. And of course, you have consumption. Consumption that puts us all apart, struggling in this rat race. Our lives revolve around consumption. Human bonds are deteriorating, right? You get social erosion because everybody is struggling to make ends meet and to get on a somewhat higher position in the capitalist pyramid system, right? Because if you're on the bottom, you are screwed. So everybody is just struggling and rushing to get a little bit more on top. But when the system remains what it is, ecological destruction and social destruction, they are certainties. And so this is what you get. You get an enormous amount of socio-ecological necrosis, of dead socio-ecological tissue starving from its lifeblood by the parasitic wealth extraction of the power structure, because it concentrates and extracts wealth so efficiently to a certain power elite, a small minority of humanity. Now, what could we achieve in truly free market? In a market where people would exchange goods and services and enjoy the enormous wellsprings of the division of labor, right? The enormous blessings of cooperation. Ah, it could be fantastic if wealth and power wasn't sucked up by this parasitic overhead of capitalism. But of course, we need propaganda to drive a system so insane. And so when we talk about sheeple, some will say, oh, that's not nice, man. Yeah, maybe it's not nice, but it is true, right? An enormous amount of people in academia, in the media, in the government, the bureaucrats, the military, all are just brainwashed and controlled to reproduce a system that is utterly socio-ecologically destructive, right? This is a kind of collective madness. So, what we need to do is to stop comfortably sleepwalking in the killing machine. To be human is to resist, and we will need the best of our knowledge against capitalism. So really thank you for waking the fuck up